What were the elements of this reform package that would bring together the grain dealer's son and the laborer's daughter into the same classroom? A key emphasis was on making schools tuition-free, which required new taxes. In states like New York, raising taxes helped improve charity schools and goad upper-class parents into using this resource rather than paying the double tax of private school and public provision. This push for free schools paid for by general tax revenue led to divisive political campaigning, certainly on the scale of today's fights over Common Core or charter schools. Even by 1860, only half of Massachusetts districts had tuition-free schooling. It wouldn't be until the 1870s that the ed reformers triumphed in this regard, even in Massachusetts, and it was much later in the southern U.S. In pursuing tuition-free schooling, these middle-class reformers found common ground with more working-class Jacksonian Democrats, and both railed against the private academies and charity schools that might solidify class divisions. A key innovation was the use of state funding to supplement local funding, which state superintendents could condition on ending tuition. In a sense, this program required a blend of equality and excellence. We might easily see tuition-free schools as part of the equality ledger, but consider that much of the program of the Common School movement was about improving the quality of public schools, such that middle-class and wealthy families would make use of them. In other words, excellence was also a core value of the Common School movement, in particular improving the conditions and teaching in rural schools and improving graded, differentiated instruction in urban schools. So the Common School reforms were about achieving both equality and excellence, depending on the setting. Take their dogged efforts to make schools general and uniform, language that you'll find in state constitutions across the United States. This was a way to equalize opportunity in rural areas, but it required raising the standards for textbooks and teaching so that urban centers weren't completely outpacing the rural ones. This became a well-worn pattern for the next century. Urban innovations in education, such as age-graded school classrooms, chalkboards, high schools, and sports teams, filtering out to more rural districts, thanks in large part to the supervision of schools at the state level. A mark of the Common School movement was the creation of state boards of education with state superintendents. But we should not confuse these positions of the 19th century with those of the 21st. In the days of Horace Mann, State Superintendent of Massachusetts from the office's inception in 1837 through 1848, these state superintendents did not have nearly as much power, and they lacked the army of staff that now exists in most education offices. In the words of historian Carl Castle, state superintendents were more like preachers than bureaucrats. Rather than govern, superintendents like Mann observed and reported on the conditions of the schools in their state. But that isn't to say that they had no power. Mann used his reports and their statistics to rank districts. He was one of the first to use the metric per pupil expenditure to cajole towns into ponying up more for their schools. And it had its effects. The school committee of Palmer, Massachusetts in 1851 said it was a mortification to be dead last among the state's 316 towns. Never underestimate the power of naming and shaming. If we take per pupil spending as a proxy for excellence, such information promoted a virtuous race to the top that might at least narrow the gap, if not create equal conditions. One of the most noteworthy aspects of the Common School system that developed in the U.S. was that they were co-educational, with women and men taught side by side. The Common School reformers had strong opinions on all manner of topics related to schools, including the education of toddlers, which they considered a travesty, and they successfully fought to make elementary schools start at a later age. But interestingly, they spilled very little ink over the education of women. If we go back to Charlestown, it was a rare place where sex segregation had been hotly debated, and the controversy helps illuminate just how radical the Common School movement was in many ways. The town in 1848 had reorganized its school system to abolish sex segregation, raising the ire of 176 parents who sent their children to an all-girls school. These parents, above all, were afraid of what would happen if their daughters, at a dangerous age, mingled with low-life boys, subject to the rude assaults by writing allusions and intercourse which no vigilance can fully prevent, afraid of a mistake at this period that often becomes a source of lasting misery. They didn't want their daughters knocked up by any old boy. Teachers, administrators, and other parents argued that, in fact, putting boys and girls together in school would improve the behavior of boys and make girls more serious and critical students. As one committee member noted, the objection to coeducation was an attack upon the root of the common school system. The law has provided that these schools shall be public and common. The rich and the poor, the high and the low, the polite and the vulgar, all have an equal right in them. Charlestown School Board decided to keep coeducation. Next, we'll briefly conclude about what the common school reforms did and did not achieve.